Hello and welcome to this new ER2 modding SDK tutorial. Today we're gonna take a look on how to create custom animations without using Blender. For this tutorial we're gonna use this M4 example that I set it up already in another tutorial. It's just a simple weapon. It uses a magazine though, so it's an SMG template, and right now it's using the generic magazine animations. So the first thing we want to do is to set it to use custom. And now this means that this animation, instead of using the preset of animations that is already inside the game for generic weapons, it's gonna use these fields here to get the animations. So we can create animations and put the name of the animations we created here in every of these fields. So when we are using custom animation, first of all, you have to make sure that you always create a put away animation, which is actually the equip animations. Sometimes names can be confusing because they have been created a lot of time ago and the use might have been different in the past, so apologize for that. However, again, this is the equip animation, so the animation of bringing the weapon into the hands, and the last frame of the equip animation is gonna be the old animation basically. Then you got the reload animations. You can reload when the weapon is empty, which is the reload full, or when the weapon is half empty, which is the half. If your weapon is set to be a bolt action weapon, you can add also or only bolt animation reloads. So you can add the open chamber animation, the loop chamber animation, and the closed chamber animation. You can also close the chamber in a different way using a different animation with this field when you have no ammo in your weapon, so when you are chambering the first bullet when closing the bolt. This might be the case of some few weapons, for example some kind of shotguns. You can have an animation for the bolt action when firing each shot, again for the bolt action weapon, and you can have a barrel change animation that happens every few rounds of overheat. Always remember that the weapon is still gonna get cooled down after some time, so this is not just an animation that will happen after firing this certain amount of shot, but you have to fire them all in the same burst. So we can now start actually creating these animations. So first, let's choose a folder where we want to put our animations. I'm gonna rename this folder because this folder uses animation made on Blender, and I'm gonna create a folder for the animations made on Unity. So this is for the other tutorial basically you might have already seen on how to make animations from within Blender. So this is the alternative way, which is making them from Unity. It's gonna be much simpler, but also the result is gonna be probably less good. So using Blender is the high standard version for making animations. So let's go inside this Unity folder, which is where we are gonna save animation later on, and let's set up our system to start animating this weapon. So also notice that I renamed this M4. Actually I created a copy which is different from the other M4 that I animated using Blender. So I have the M4 rifle, which is the one I animated through Blender, and the M4 rifle simple animes, which is the one I'm gonna animate now. And this is the magazine that fits both weapons because it has the same socket name. So let's get back here. Let's choose both the weapon and the magazine in this case because this weapon has a magazine, and let's choose ER2 mods, tools, setup animator. So this is gonna create this object here, which is the animator where we got the hands and the arms and the weapons with the magazine attached. So basically, first of all, let me show you what this is. This is a rigged uniform, so I can move the child objects here, which are the bones, that allows me to move and rotate all the parts of the arms and the weapon too, because the weapon is parented here. So I can, for the moment, remove the weapon and the magazine in the scene. I just need this one. So first, notice that in the root object I have this animation component that holds this list, which is empty for now, and this is the list of all the animations I got for this weapon. I will also need to have the Windows animation window that I already had here, but this is the window where we're gonna create and edit keyframes for our animation. So first thing you have to know before actually start animating is that you have to move during your animation some parts, of course. Like you might want to move the fingers, you might want to move the magazine position, the weapon position, the arms, and a lot of stuff. But there are some stuff that you don't want to move because that's gonna break your animation. So you don't have to move anything that stands above the center spine. So you can move this in your animation, which moves everything. And I'm moving the camera view here because this is the position. This is the view that you're gonna have in game when this animation is played. So as you can see, I can move the center spine, but you can't move the rig root, neither the root, because this is gonna break your animation if you do that. So never move these two objects. You can again move the center spine, you can move the left shoulder, the right shoulder, but everything that inside them, you can't really move them, or at least it's not suggested. Everything that here inside, it's suggested just to rotate them. Because for example, if I want to move this finger, as you can see, moving it is gonna make some weird deformations. So everything that is here should only be rotated. There might be some issues on skinning in some parts because this is just a test rig root to create animation, so it's not perfect. It's not always the same as you have in game, at least not in this specific version, but don't worry too much. It shouldn't break your animation workflow. One last thing that you have to make sure is that here you got the position of rotation and movement, of course, set to pivot. Why is that? That is because pivot means that you're gonna rotate and move the bones from their pivot positions. But if you have this set to center instead, sometimes it might happen that the bone that you are rotating is not from the pivot, but is from the center, causing some weird distortion like this. But apparently on this skeleton doesn't look like it changes much, but still I suggest to avoid issues, to keep this to pivot. I also suggest to set this to local normally, because this means that you are rotating the bones on their local axis. This is to prevent weird rotation that is not on the axis that you were expecting. And finally, because this is just a test animation, of course, so I really don't want to spend too much time here. So I might want to close my hand here, so I can choose multiple bones, like this one, and this one, and I want to close them. Okay, let's now move to the other bone, to the other arm. So I might want to move this a little bit down and start rotating it. Then move to my forearm. I'm gonna twist my bone a little. So let's move this a little bit down. It's very common to have the shoulder position too high on the first implementation of your animation when you start animating it, so don't worry on bringing them a little bit down on your scene. It's normal. Okay, so let's move my shoulder a little bit here, and now let's adjust my hand fingers. So on my thumb should be having a solid grip around this weapon. Sometimes I want just to add keyframes for my fingers or some parts, so I just move them a little just to create the keyframe, because it can always be helpful to have them. So in this case, that's what I'm doing for the starting bone, at least for some bones. But now I'm gonna adjust them individually, so I want a solid grip here as well. Alright, so this is not the best grip I could create, of course, but you know, it's just a test and it's quite working. You can see the result here on the left. Okay, so as you can see, when I move my animation now, my first frame is the original keyframe that Unity created about the original pose, and when I move this, my animation happens and my weapon gets held in hand. But this is not really what I want in this animation. I want to keep this animation and have it keep it in the last keyframe. So what I can do here is to copy all the keyframes here and to pass them in the first position. Then I might want to create a keyframe of moving this entire rig, for example, from outside of the scene to inside. This should be enough to make it look like I'm equipping it. You of course might want to also interact with some parts in your weapon or do some special movements, but for this example, let's just do it. So notice that I haven't animated the center spine bone yet, so I don't have keyframes for it. So if now I create a keyframe for my center spine bone, it's gonna create it here and not in the final pose. So what happened is that the bone stays down. So I need first to have my keyframe of my bone that doesn't have the keyframe here at the end. So what I can do is to create it. So I want the keyframe for both position and rotation. So I can notice that the position should be 0, 0, 0. So if now I move this and set it back to 0, my keyframe got created. I can do the same for the rotation. So now I got keyframe for position and rotation of my center spine bone. Basically, this is why I was telling you before to create your keyframes, even if sometimes it looks unnecessary, because if you need to create keyframes that happens before on those fingers or those parts that you think you will animate, it's always very useful to already have the keyframes of what happens next if they are already in a good position. So every time you see something that is in a good position and you want it to be in that position, and it doesn't have keyframes for that position, it just randomly is on the position you want to be, well, then it's good to add a keyframe to like save the position and say, okay, this position, this keyframe is important, I want it. So now this is what I'm doing. I'm creating the keyframe position for my center spine on this position. So now if I move here and I rotate my weapon down to equip it, as you can see, my animation works perfectly. So this is gonna be my equip animation. This is a little bit slow, so I'm gonna move all this entire column by dragging the first point a little bit back. I also want my animation to be a little bit cooler, just a little bit, so I'm gonna maybe rotate this a little bit like this. Okay, so it looks like I'm also, you know, spending some time taking proper aim, and this is gonna be our keep animation, quite decent one. So to make our reload animation, let's create a new clip and let's call this M4 simple anim reload. This is gonna be a reload animation that is gonna be used both for reload when the weapon is empty and the weapon is full, but not because it makes sense for this weapon, just because I don't want to spend too much time showing every kind of animation that you can do, because actually once you understand how a reload animation works, you can definitely do any other kind of animation. So let's just call this reload in a generic way. You will notice that I don't have any keyframe in my reload animation, so I want to go here and copy my keyframes in the last frame here and copy them to be my keyframes in the first frame here, because when I reload, I want my reload to match perfectly my hand holding gun position, so I don't see any jump between the animations. In fact, later on, if I'm gonna create more keyframes here and if I'm gonna move anything, I will have to remember to copy my keyframes also here, so my first frame of this animation will still match my last frame of the keep. Alright, so here's my starting position, and let's start animating this. So remember to press the record here, and let's move my hand to grab my magazine first. So I want to first move a little bit up my weapon to be able to see my magazine, and I want to move my left hand in the position of the magazine. Okay, and again, this is all messed up, is not super good. Also, everything in Unity has a little bit of limitation, so you're always gonna have weird results if you don't use really, you know, complex animation tools. So now, as you can see, my keyframe on holding my magazine is quite okay, but I want this transition to be a little bit better. So I want, for example, my arm to move like this, so at least looks like I'm trying to grab it. I might want also my fingers to look a little bit less weird, so in this same position I can make them a little bit more on the same position, like I would do if I was grabbing something. Just better. You see, this is more a concept than something really quality, but as you can see, my grab is decently convincing. Okay, so next thing I suggest to do is to copy these frames for like a little portion of a second, because my idea is that I'm not gonna detach the magazine immediately. I need to put a little bit of force there. So my idea is that I will need to make it look like I'm pulling the magazine, and this is gonna cause my entire weapon to rotate a little bit down. My pulling force will do this, and when my magazine is released, my weapon is gonna go in the opposite direction, and my weapon is gonna go in the opposite direction, and my magazine is gonna get released. So when I do this, I first detach my magazine, so I move my hand, as you can see, and my magazine. So remember what I was saying before. Well, first remember that you can't move the magazine, you can only move the weapon bone. If you move your magazine by mistake and you notice that, delete your bone. So select it and press cancel. And of course remember never to move, all the other bones I was saying before, like root, rig, root. So from time to time check here in your animation that you don't have bones that shouldn't be there. Alright, so let's move my magazine bone. So I want this to be grabbed down with my hand, but now you will notice that my magazine is not really following my hand. And why is that? That is because the magazine never had keyframes before. The only keyframe he has is now get automatically generated, and it's on the first frame of the animation. So basically my magazine is now moving down from the first frame to the last frame, while I want my magazine to move from this frame to this frame. So I have to search the keyframe of my magazine, and here it is. I want to select it and press Ctrl C to copy it and paste it in the last position before I want my magazine to move. So now from this position to this position, my magazine will stay in the same position, and it's gonna start moving only for this position here. So this is the result so far. Okay, this is a good start. Now I want my magazine to be replaced, so I'm gonna move a little bit forward and move my magazine away from the camera, and I will also move my left shoulder to follow my magazine. Don't worry if your animation looks strange outside of the camera, you don't really care about that. Like if you don't see it, that's good. That's actually a good rule for video game developing. An approximation, you don't want to animate and spend time on something you will never ever see anyway. So I'm moving a little bit my center spine again to make my weapon looks like it's still heavy and moving down by the time, even if I'm not, because I'm not holding this with two weapons, with two hands. So my weapon is gonna of course move a little bit down because of gravity. Then I can attach the new magazine, so I might animate this in a different way, but in this case I can just copy my keyframe here, so my magazine just goes back, and I can copy this frame of inserting the magazine. So this is just playing in reverse basically. One thing that I might want to do is to make this to look like my magazine doesn't fit perfectly here immediately, like it stops a bit and then it goes inside. So I can create some frames there where this stops for a second. To do so I have multiple ways. I might double click here, and as you can see, when I double click here I create a copy of all the keyframes of the current position, and with that I can copy these all keyframes for a few frames, and as you can see nothing happened in these few frames. So basically now it's like the magazine gets stuck as for a few frames before getting inserted. That's what I wanted to achieve. However, nothing actually moves here because I made keyframes for everything, so everything is in the same place in between these frames. So I might want to delete some frames. For example, I want to delete the center spine frames. That's because I still want my center spine to keep moving during this action, and I actually want my center spine to move up in this part. My center spine again is the rotation of all this body, and I want this to move up because when I pushing my magazine inside, this is gonna of course put force and push my weapon too. So I want to put my keyframe of start rotation here and my keyframe of end rotation here. And of course, once I inserted the magazine, the weapon is gonna then move down again because I stop applied force. So let's see the result so far. Okay, it's not the best result ever, but it's decent. And then I can copy all my initial frames and pass them there. Actually, this procedure is breaking a little bit my animation, as you can see, because now I have all these keyframes that are gonna be interpolated from these keyframes. So my animation stops, start lerping toward the end from here, while I wanted it to do from here. So I'm gonna Ctrl Z, and I want to double click here. So I create keyframes for all the bones that animated. And now if I passed again my keyframes of my start position here, my interpolation will start from here for each keyframe. So now I don't have weird movements again. And I can also copy the keyframes here, which are the keyframes of my original end position I had here. So again, my hand has a more natural movement when grabbing that handle again. So this is my complete animation. Not the best result again, but I mean, at least you can see how you can animate a weapon. It's always a good thing to check your timing in this analyzing your animation. So if you see that some parts are too slow, you can move your entire keyframe columns to match it, but something like this is decent. Let's bring our weapon in our scene. So this is the weapon now, and I want now to tell my weapon to use the animation I just created. So to do so, let's see where I want to put them, and let's find them in the project folder. So I put them here. I have to copy these names to be exactly the same in these fields, and remember to set this to use custom, otherwise it will use the placeholder for these sets. So first person put away again is the equip, and the name is M4 simple anim equip. Then I got the reload, which is M4 simple anim reload. Notice that I can create an audio clip to match my animation, and I can put it here. Same for the half reload, I'm gonna use this. This weapon doesn't have a bolt action feature between each shot, doesn't have a bolt action chamber loading, neither a barrel change, so I can just ignore everything else. Alright, my weapon should be now ready. Remember always to save your prefab, because when you edit what's here in the hierarchy, you're not actually editing what you saved. So let's choose override apply all from the object I edited, which has a prefab correlation because this has this blue thing and it's correlated with this object here. So now if I select my prefab in the project folder and I scroll down, I see that also what I changed here is applied here. Okay, we are now ready to finalize this. I'm gonna put this object in the same asset bundle of the other M4 I animated with Blender in the other tutorial, which is test animus M4 asset bundle. So I'm gonna choose this asset bundle. Notice also that these and these are gonna be in the same asset bundle, but this is gonna be called M4 rifle and this is gonna be called M4 rifle simple anims inside the game. Also notice that I can't rename my weapon now, so this is something you have to check before start animating. Why is that? Because my animation completely depends on the names of my weapon. So if I go here, as you can see, I have my keyframes, and my keyframes of my weapon is called M4 rifle simple anims. So luckily I never really animate my weapon, except actually for this equip animation where I say where my weapon is. But if now I want to rename my weapon and I name this to, for example, simple anims 2, then now your bone position is missing. And what does that mean is that what you animated is not gonna get animated. In fact, while everything looks like working good, but that's because I'm moving everything like center spine here, actually my weapon is not in the correct position on my hand because the keyframe for that is not found. So if now I fix that in the name here, I see my bone being back to white, and I see my weapon correctly placed in hand. You can also rename your bone, selecting it and pressing F2. So if you rename your weapon, you can still change the name of your bone in the animation. So I can paste the same name here and do it like this. Now it's gonna work again with my new name. So you can actually rename your weapon, but if you rename your weapon, the magazine hold position, the spin, the fire position, or, you know, whatever you're gonna animate in your weapon, never reanimate, never rename, of course, the skeleton, only the weapon. But if you rename stuff in your weapon and this doesn't match anymore, you can still select it and press F2. I don't suggest to do that. I suggest just to choose good naming from the start, of course. Okay, I can also delete my skeleton here because I don't need it anymore. So let's get back to my weapon. Let's check again that everything is correct. So my names are here. My bundle is correctly assigned. I can save my scene with Ctrl S or with save. This is important because your animation are not gonna be saved until you save your scene. If you created a new scene, you might want to save it in some folder you created, of course, or whatever you want. And now we're ready to upload our mod. Let's choose test anims M4. This is the image I created for the other tutorial. So if now I go in check asset in the bundle, and this is always suggested when you create weapons with custom animations, because this is gonna fix eventual issues. You're also gonna see what's inside the bundle. So here you see that I have in my bundle the M4 rifle magazine, and the new weapon that I animated. I also got a little error here, but this error doesn't look very important in this case. Luckily, this error was surely fixed automatically when doing the check asset in the bundle. So if I was compiling this mod before checking the asset in the bundle, I was having some issues. In fact, if I do it again, the error doesn't happen anymore. So it's fixed now. And now I can build my mod on the Steam Workshop. So remember, of course, to start Steam before starting the upload and to set the visibility you want. And let's click here to start the upload. So now I can subscribe to my mod to start the download. And when the download is done, you can start the game. So as always, you can try the objects you create in the mission editor, creating a custom squad, or you can just go to the shooting range. So here we can select the M4 rifle simple anims, which is the one we just animated. Just to let you know, here I also have the M4 rifle, which is the one we used in another tutorial where we explained how to make animation through Blender. But this is the right one, the one we made in this tutorial. So this has the animation we made today through Unity. So as you can see, this is the keep anim, just like we made it. And this is the reload anim, just like we made it. And so the weapon is working. Congratulations for creating your first animations using Unity.